I would sit and take copious notes on the importance of avoiding alcohol or submitting to the authority of my parents at all ages, even after marriage. Each seminar would end with a call for people to raise their hands as a sign they were pledging to follow whatever IBLP principle had just been explained. I felt pressure to prove my dedication to God, so it never took long before my hand was up in the air. One of those pledges includes the single service pledge, and it was a pledge to say, hey, basically, I'm not going to court or get married until this age, and I'm going to use this as time to serve either in IBLP ministries or ministry in general. All right, y'all, I'm going to go through Jill Duggar's memoir, Counting the Cost, and really look how she went from the perfect little IBLP girl to becoming the black sheep of her family. Now, this came out, I believe, in 2023. I did read it as soon as I got it in 2023, but I haven't picked it up since. And I really want to go back and look at it with new eyes and new perspective, as now not only has Josh been arrested and sentenced, but now Joe has also been arrested. So this book was written by Jill with the help of her husband and a ghostwriter named Craig Borlace. It's written pretty well, in my opinion. I think that it really gives us a lot of insight into especially how Jim Bob ran things and a little bit into his psyche as well as Jill's. So I'm really excited to go chapter by chapter with y'all. So she starts off with a short prologue called The Sled. The prologue is set on February 2nd, 2014. That's just about 3 or 4 months before she marries her husband Derek, and a year and 3 months change before Josh's first scandals are released by In Touch. She's at the big house, which is her parents' house in Tontitown, Arkansas. Technically, there was no problem with Derek and I being outside together that way. We weren't on a date or anything, and we didn't need a formal chaperone. Plus, there were easily a half dozen little Duggars running around out there with us, playing in the snow. We were safe. We were following all the courtship rules that my parents had encouraged us to write down. She doesn't say whether her parents made them for her or not. I would be interested to know, especially those first few couples that were at the height of the TV show, if they made the rules or if their parents made the rules. Anyway, she continues and enumerates those. No holding hands, no in-person one-on-one conversations without another adult or mature chaperone present, no putting ourselves in a position where we would fall into temptation. All the same, I knew people would be watching. It was to be expected. In between rides on the sled down the hill that runs from the house, we were trading stories. Derek talking about the new job he was about to start, me telling him about my week as a student midwife. At some point, the conversation was probably going to turn to the different wedding venues we'd been looking at. We were doing nothing unusual, nothing that any other couple of 20-somethings who were weeks away from getting engaged would hesitate to do. I was happy, at peace and in love. So it looks like that they are not yet engaged, but looking at wedding venues, probably because they go from engaged to wedding very fast. I can't really judge her because I'm not yet engaged, about to get engaged, and we have been looking online, not in person, at wedding venues. So I was surprised when I heard Mom call out, "Hey kids!" The snow was soaking up the sound, and it felt like the world was listening. When I turned to see her standing on the front porch, my stomach dropped. She was smiling that same smile the world has seen for years, a smile that's pure innocence but protects like a shield. And her voice was full of sweetness and joy, but I knew that voice well. By that point in my life, I'd been obeying it for 23 years. I knew what was coming next. That paragraph, I remember that paragraph from when I read this a couple years ago when it first came out, was one that really stuck out in my mind. Like, as somebody who has been following the Duggars for a while, I can put myself on the exterior outside of that situation and just see everything that's going on. Hear all those people's voices, especially Michelle's, and I can see in my mind their facial expressions in reaction to this. Also, did you guys like my Michelle voice? No boys and girls on the same sled. Yes, ma'am, I said, jumping off the sled immediately. As we know, Michelle and Jim Bob often talked about instant obedience they would teach their kids, even through little games as children. But Derek didn't move. At least he didn't back away from the sled, the scene of our crime. Instead, he was looking around. He was trying to figure out who my mom could have been addressing like that. Some of the little Duggars, maybe. A second passed, then another. Finally, he stopped searching. His face shifted from curiosity to something like bewilderment. He turned back to the big house, called out, "I'm sorry, Miss Duggar," and got to his feet. At this point, they'd been together for several months. I know that he was in Nepal for a lot of their, I guess, pre-courtship, but most of their courtship was in person. So I'm wondering why he didn't already realize kind of the rules of the road here with courting a Duggar girl, and that wouldn't be an appropriate thing to do. But I guess, Jill and Derek did grow up both very devout Christians, but in a very different way. And perhaps a few months isn't enough to intuitively know these kind of rules, perhaps. I was grateful that he had gotten off the other side of the sled from me, making sure it was between us, so that all the eyes that were currently upon us could see that we were not being disobedient. "I'm sorry," I said quietly to him. "I should have known better." Derek smiled. "It's no big deal, Jill, really." But the bewilderment was still there. I could see it in his eyes. One thing about growing up in the Duggar family, I saw a lot of bewilderment in a lot of different people's eyes. Cameramen, journalists, everyday strangers in a store. There was always someone staring, always someone trying to figure out if we were for real. For years, I didn't pay it much attention. I either brushed it off or told myself that people's confusion about Duggar family life was just another sign that we were being blessed by God with a wonderful opportunity to show the world how we live. On that day in the snowy front yard with the empty sled between us and all those eyes on Derek and me, I was unable to see things clearly. It was the same a month later when Derek proposed to me, and I made sure that when I said yes, the film crew got the shot just how they wanted it. I couldn't see my life from the outside. That's very interesting because I'm sure there was a lot of points while making that show, especially even in their relationships, that were contrived or reshot, what have you, for TV. And while the courtship is already weird with putting these like arbitrary rules on everything, like you can't say I love you till engagement, you can't hold hands to engagement, whatever, each couple's rules were, being in front of the camera and having to pay attention to how you're being portrayed and how you're, standing for the shot to be filmed correctly must make things so much more awkward. She continues, "It didn't stay that way. Soon, the bewilderment would be mine." So that's where the short prologue ends. I love this prologue personally, and I think that it's so interesting because I compare this moment with the sled, and like the bewilderment would be mine. And I really compare it to when Ginger and Jeremy talk about watching seminars, because Jim Bob made Jeremy watch the seminars. And then Jeremy showing her like, hey, like this isn't in the Bible, this isn't the Bible. And her being like, wait, what? I feel like, yeah, they have a similar kind of moment where it all clicks and it's like, oh, I'm a little bit bewildered. This isn't super normal, actually. Chapter 1, Sweet Jilly Muffin. Click. My parents didn't believe in magic. They didn't believe in dancing either, but they understood the power of music. And like all magicians, they knew exactly how to wield it. I feel like that little line there is her low-key calling them manipulative, but whatever. Just the sound of mom loading a cassette into the tape player was enough to call us all to order. With one press of that button marked play, we would stop. We would listen. We would zip up our mouths, lock our feet on the ground, and our eyes on mom. We would be in her control completely, held by the 3-second silence before the music would start, ready for whatever came next. Sometimes it was a violin or a piano, other times a rousing chorus of voices. On the rarest occasion, we might hear drums, but only if they accompanied a marching band. It would take years before I would have the words to accurately describe and define the narrow genres of music we were allowed to listen to. A cappella, hymns, Southern gospel, certain classical pieces like Handel's Water Music. I was an adult by the time I could understand the reason why these and these alone were the kinds of music that were allowed to fill the air of the Duggar household. But back then, in that sweaty living room, I didn't have any need for words. The music alone was enough. That's funny that she calls it a sweaty living room, because I remember, if you guys watch the podcast, I Pray You Put This Journal Away, I think that they literally described like the first Duggar home, not the big house, but the one, I think they call it like the Johnson Road home. He described the smell as like sweaty toddler hands. Was what it smelled like when you walked into their living room. So I think it's super interesting and like puts a very like visceral image in my mind. I liked it best when mom played Ever in Joyful Song. Almost immediately the violin was marching and spinning and twisting like a kite caught in a storm. All of us Duggar kids would get caught up in it, from my oldest brother Josh down to whichever baby would be old enough to rock on all fours, dribbling with delight. At times, music was a distraction. Mom used it as a tool to break us out of a cranky mood or inject a little joy when it was needed. Other times, she'd use it as a motivator to keep us on track as we folded laundry or unloaded groceries. Whatever the reason for pressing play, she used it wisely. Music had power and it could be turned off as easily as it was turned on, especially if someone mentioned the D word. "Look," one of my younger siblings would say quietly to another little Duggar, "I'm dancing." Click. Silence. "Hey guys, listen," Mom would say, her sweetest smile back on once more. "We don't dance. Remember, we want to be careful how we move our bodies so we don't draw attention to the wrong areas. It's okay to jump for joy when we're excited, but we don't dance." Most times the music would go back on and we'd be allowed to continue, but if someone's joy jumping got a little too physical, it was either Handel's water music or game over. Silence. Most of us Duggar kids knew the rules, but sometimes when friends were over, we had to stop because one of them was sticking their butt out, or even worse, "Hey Ellie, shaking it." "We need to be very, very careful about the way we move our bodies," Mom would say. "If you're shaking part of it, where do you think people will be drawn to look?" That's a very IBLP thing, like the where eyes are drawn to is talked about a lot in the wisdom booklets. We'd all chorus the answer together. "The part you're shaking." "That's right. And you don't want people looking at your bottom, do you? You don't want people thinking bad thoughts about you, right?" "No, ma'am." "Remember what happened when King David was dancing in the street after returning with the Ark of the Covenant?" His wife despised him. "That's right. He was dancing and he was immodestly dressed, and his wife despised him for it. Let's all remember that. When we are having fun, let's make sure we don't move in a way that draws people's attention to places it shouldn't." By the end of the talk, there was no more jumping. Dancing was off limits, so I learned from a young age how to be a hunter. We lived in Springdale, Arkansas, a city of about 70,000 at the foothills of the Ozark Mountains, in a little house set on 3/4 of an acre next to a church. That's their first house. I guess their Johnston or Johnson Road house. There were cow pastures all around us, and being homeschooled like we were, we spent a lot of our days outside drinking in that wholesome northwestern Arkansas air. But I didn't hunt with a gun and I didn't lay traps. Instead of a rabbit or a quail, it was approval that I was searching for. And by the time I was old enough to balance a baby on my hip while I folded laundry, which I'm guessing was sometime around 7 or 8, I was hands down the best approval hunter in the whole Duggar family. From watching from the outside, I would say Ginger also has a very similar, at least from the outside, kind of vibe to her, where she's trying to like chase the approval of her parents. However, I would say by just looking from the outside in, that Jill is right in her estimation that she is like the best approval hunter of the family. When it came to getting a nod of acknowledgement or appreciation from mom or pops at the dinner table, or best of all, being singled out for direct praise for listening intently while sitting perfectly quiet and perfectly still on one of the mauve pink living room chairs during family Bible time at the end of each day, I tried my hardest to stand out as the most mature child in the room. I will also say I do think growing up she was probably Jim Bob's favorite. Whenever the tape player was turned on and we were jumping for joy, I always made sure that my movements were perfectly modest and that my jumping was perfectly straight. There was no wiggle whatsoever in my butt. No risk at all that the music would be turned off on my account. "Stop, guys," Pops might say when it was Bible time and Joy would be doing a somersault on the floor and the twins, either set, would be wrestling for the best position on the couch. "You look like a can of worms. Look at Jill. She's got her notebook and Bible out and she's ready to go." I wanted to be the good girl. I tried to be the perfect daughter, and my goal to be good and perfect even earned me a special pet name that only my parents used. I was Sweet Jilly Muffin, the fourth born, second daughter in the family. "Oh yeah," Pops would say whenever he was asked about his kids and he thought none of us were listening. "Jill's so sweet and kind and caring. Out of all my daughters, she's most like Michelle." That's actually so crazy that the one that seemingly is his favorite and the most like his wife is the most on the outside of the family now. Isn't that so weird? And looking back, like if I was to guess who would be the Jill black sheep of the family, it would have never been Jill in those early days. For an approval hunter like me, being compared to my mom was like the greatest prize I could ever wish for. Mom was calm, self-sacrificing, and entirely loving. She seemed nearly incapable of anger or bitterness, and the love she had for her family only ever grew larger. With every new birth and additional sibling welcomed into the Duggar family, my respect and admiration for my mom only ever increased. And Pops, my dad, Jim Bob Duggar, well, that story's not too different either. From a young age, I looked up to him. Just before our family reached double digits, he started bringing a few of us older kids with him to work at his car lot to give Mom a break and have some quality time with us older ones. He loved spending time with us and told us often we were his number one hobby. I never got tired of being around him, and it was a treat whenever we got to go to work with him. I'd watch him interact with customers, treating them well, being honest about the vehicles he was selling, and going the extra mile to help make things right. On the rare occasion, he ended up selling a lemon. And I knew he was a good man. He was the same honest, upstanding Christian man at work as he was whenever he was talking to us kids at home. He was the head of our household, and that was the way it was supposed to be. So being Sweet Jelly Muffin was easy for me. The role of perfect daughter didn't feel like a role at all. It was who I was and who I wanted to be. In a family with as many kids as we had, 12 by the time I was 9 years old, chaos was never too far away, and the opportunities to help out and be of service to the family were ever present. There was always a younger sibling who needed feeding, dressing, or bathing, and when I'd helped all I could, I would play by filling an old medicine dropper bottle with watered-down Kool-Aid, put it in my kid-sized apron with a few other items from my nurse playset, and do my rounds. That's so funny that she would use Kool-Aid, like the phrase, drink the Kool-Aid. That is very ironic. Are you okay? I'd ask each of my siblings in turn. Do you feel sick at all? Let me give you a little something to help. I was delighted when my parents introduced what became known as the buddy system. Each of us older kids would be given a younger sibling to help feed, dress, and bathe, as well as sit next to and buckle up when we were out anywhere in our 15-passenger van. I was the first one to sign up and get my own buddy, and I happily looked after my little sister Joy from when she was around 1 year old. And then my brother James, when he came along. I was a 10-year-old girl whose parents trusted her with their precious babies. I felt like a little mom. I couldn't have been happier. This is so crazy what ends up happening with Jill, because she really was perfect for this family. Like, she has those nurturing traits. She wants to do all this work. It's really crazy that Jim Bob fucked everything up, later on in the story, and that he can't really reap the benefits of that. Mom was the most amazing teacher, whether it was making flaky pie crust for Pop's favorite pumpkin pies or learning how to curl my hair just right. I relished any opportunity to learn from her. Spending time with Mom made me deeply happy, and an invitation to join her for a one-on-one outing to run errands, which often meant staying out way past bedtime, would leave me smiling inside for days. Mom was a role model too. She always prioritized us kids and would wake up around the clock to care for us if we were sick. Even when she was sick herself, she'd be awake all hours, dosing meds, handing out popsicles, and bringing us wet rags to cool our fevers. In the highs as well as the lows, she taught me what it means to be a mother. All I had to do to gain my parents' approval was to behave in a way Mom and Pops expected. And in the Duggar household, there were opportunities to remind us kids of those expectations and rules from sunup to sundown. Mom homeschooled us during the day, and Pops rounded off each evening by sitting in the living room or in the hallway between the girls' and boys' bedrooms and reading from the Bible as he talked to us about character and sin and everything else that mattered in life. As a young child, I never experienced my parents as overbearing or domineering. Instead, in my young eyes, they were about as loving and fun and wonderful as any girl could hope for. At the end of the day, they'd write us notes affirming and encouraging us for whatever we'd done well that day, being kind to a sibling, working hard at our schoolwork, making the extra effort to help out. I never felt the need to punish against their rules, and I never found either of my parents restrictive or constraining. If anything, I was grateful for the boundaries they'd laid down for our family. Even though I knew my parents were powerful and able to protect us, I was aware that there was a world beyond the land we lived on, or the used car lot that Pops owned. And that world, as they reminded us over and over, was full of dangers and temptation and traps. Out there, my parents' protection could only go so far. Careful, girls. Let's be modest. Keep your dress down or tucked into your pantaloons. Pantaloons is crazy. Pops didn't have to remind us often, but sometimes when we'd be heading out on a bike ride, one of my younger sisters might need to be told. Whenever that happened, I'd check myself as a matter of course. Most of us would. We knew how important modesty was. None of us wanted to be accused of being revealing. As girls, Mom made almost all of our clothes, and we only ever wore full-length skirts or dresses. All that dress fabric made cycling difficult, so Mom made us full-length pantaloons to wear underneath. I appreciated my parents' careful eyes as they checked for our modesty. As I grew older, the fear that I might be immodest and cause someone to think bad thoughts would only get stronger. It's also just crazy that they're over here like checking these girls' modesty. I guess if like the pants ride up or something, but Michelle's making their clothes. It must be like if the pants ride up, I guess, or if they're not wearing it correctly, because otherwise they wouldn't have anything in their closet that would be immodest. It was even more difficult to stay modest the first time we went to a beach. We were visiting family in Savannah, Georgia, and took a trip to the beach one day. It was hot, and even though I was 8 or 9, it was my first time seeing the ocean. My first time tasting salty air or feeling the sand between my toes. My first steps were cautious, like an astronaut on a new planet, but I loved it instantly. But I was also troubled. That trip to the beach was my first time seeing so many people wearing bathing suits in public. Even though my parents had been careful to take us to the quietest corner of the quietest beach, I could still see people in the distance wearing what looked to me like practically nothing. A few couples, lots of families. I didn't want to get any bad thoughts into my head, so I tried not to stare, but it was hard not to, and I worried for Pops and my brothers. Us girls have been told often how much harder it was for boys to keep their thoughts pure. I couldn't imagine the battles they were fighting out there on the sand. That is so dramatic. Also, they're just like putting all this shit in these kids' heads to where any problem with like lust or whatever that they have is just going to be exacerbated because it's so taboo. And like to the point where the girls are like, I feel so bad for my dad and my brothers. Like, who even thinks about that as a child? It's very odd. Like at the time she's 8 or 9. That's such an odd thought. Still, the beach was a new experience for all us kids, and it brought out a different side of my parents as well. Soon they were caught up in the fun of the moment, cheering the little ones along as they ran and tumbled and played tag in the waves. We were all having fun playing in the shallow water, and like my parents, I got a little lost in the moment too. The spell broke when I saw someone walking over towards us. It was a girl about my age, and she was heading right for us, riding the small waves on her boogie board. "Why are you all wearing those clothes to swim?" she said when she was close enough to get a look at us. "Why are you not wearing your bathing suits?" Well, I said, caught between the fear of a lie and the awkwardness of talking to someone who was wearing little more than underwear in public. "We didn't plan on coming here, so we didn't bring anything else with us." The girl stared at me for a while. She took in my long dress with its now sandy hem and my blouse with its sleeves that reached almost up to my elbows. I tried not to look at her golden skin. I kept my eyes on the waves instead. I was grateful when the questions stopped and she ran back to the waves. That day on the beach wasn't the first time I talked with someone who was different than me, but it's one of the early memories that stands out the most. It was one of the first moments that I remember feeling awkward about the difference between the safety of my family and the strange lands beyond it. I tried not to dwell on it much. I told myself that whenever we were in situations like that where we stood out, it was an opportunity to be a positive example to others, just by living life and showing others how true conservative Christians should live, set apart and unpolluted by the world. We had a decent amount of friends, but those that we spent the most time with were all people my parents knew from our home church, or people with similar beliefs. So probably spent a lot of times with the Holtz, aka. On the rare occasion that I was given permission to visit one of their houses for a play date without my parents, though never on my own, always in the company of 1 or 2 of my siblings, I started noticing little things. Some families listened to music that had drums in it. Some allowed their girls to wear cycling shorts when it was hot and they were having a water fight outside. Some homes had TVs, and some kids even talked to me about having friends who went to public schools. I feel like that's probably a typical experience of having friends like in a church. Different families have slightly different standards. Instead of needing to keep any of this secret, I was grateful that my parents were happy for me to tell them whatever I had seen or heard when I was away from home. It was clear that they had thought carefully about how they wanted to raise us, and so they always had time for a discussion about the differences between our family and others. My parents liked to use role play to prepare us for life. "Okay," Mom would say at random, many times each week, usually during family Bible time in the evening. "What if someone comes up to you and says, 'Hey, Joseph, why don't you read this book right here? It's got a witch in it. What do you say?'" Joseph would deliver his line right on cue. "I'm a Christian. I'm not able to do that." "That's good, Joseph. And what about you, Ginger? What would you say if someone asked you to watch a movie with them, the kind with people who are immodestly dressed? I would say, I'm sorry, I'm a Christian. I'm not able to do that. Mom's smile would turn up extra bright and we'd all clap. That's right. And remember what we say to ourselves about the choices in front of us? This time it would be all of us to reply, our voice sing-song in unison. Others may, we may not. Mom's way of instructing us was true to who she is, a homemaker and full-time mama who knew how to nurture her babies with patience. Pops joined in on the role-playing games as well, but his approach was slightly different. He operated like a teacher or preacher, using illustrations to make his point, but mixed in a little politician and salesman who knows how to work a room. When it was his turn to mold us into the young men and women he envisioned, he was able to capture our imaginations by breaking down the challenges ahead of us into simple binary choices. You've got the world over there, he would say during Bible time, holding up his left arm far away from his body, and then thrusting his right hand far out in the other direction. Christianity is here. There's a line between them. Do you want to get as close to that line as you can? Do you want to walk so near to it that you might possibly be pulled into the world? Or do you want to steer as far away from it as you can get? I want you to picture yourself on a table, he would explain. It's so much easier for somebody to pull you off the table than for you to pull them up. Now picture yourself with 2 or 3 people up there on the table with you. Maybe it's a little harder for someone to pull you down and a little easier for you to pull that person up on the table with you. That's how it is in life, and it's why you need to be careful who you spend your time with. Like my mom always told me, show me your friends and I'll show you your future. There's actually a lot of speculation that Jim Bob's mom is who got him into like IBLP seminars and whatnot. I think it was like a reaction probably to her husband doing a bunch of shady stuff. I guess she's chill with Amy and Deanna, was before her passing, but you can tell like she does agree with Jim Bob just in those little sayings that she would do quite a bit. And a lot of them are IBLP based or IBLP adjacent. His lessons made an impact on me. They worked on my siblings as well, because whenever Pops was talking with us like this, his voice, a blend of warmth and warning, the whole room was silent. There were a lot of many sermons and stories, but one always stood out the most. I was about 12 or 13 when I went to a seminar, Pops told us. I wonder if that's an IBLP seminar. If we knew that, that might help confirm the timeline there on if Mary got them into the IBLP. That was when I first heard about the power of music and the dangers of rock and roll. It's not just the lyrics, but the music itself. When the drums get going, that backbeat has so much power over us, it can control us. That night when I arrived home, I realized that the music I had been listening to was not Christ-honoring, because it was basically rock music with Christian words added on. I felt so convicted that I immediately got my 8 tracks and took a hammer and busted them up. I wonder if that is completely true. That would be interesting to see. I didn't know what an 8-track was at first until Pop explained it, and I'd only ever heard rock music when we were out at a parade or a fair. Even my exposure to contemporary Christian music was limited at that time in my life, but I was captivated by the image of Pops being not much older than me, destroying his entire music collection because he wanted to follow God's lead in his life and live like a Christian should, set apart with convictions. He had said that I was like my mom, but there were so many things about my dad that I wanted to emulate too. It really feels like she has this very reverent idea of who her parents were when she was little, and I think as she got older and things got more complicated, it really did complicate her vision of who her parents were, or perhaps over time they might have changed and gotten different focuses and different methods of kind of control. The story became kind of a legend in our house, and we heard Pops repeat it often. We liked that it was both practical and inspirational, and that we could apply it to our own lives. We liked the idea of Dad taking a hammer to the devil like that, and we liked it because it marked the beginning of our family's involvement with a man named Bill Gothard. Okay, so it marked the beginning of our family's involvement with a man named Bill Gothard. So I guess that's her confirming that he did indeed start the IBLP kind of seminars and getting into that when he was 12 or 13, as she mentions before, which would insinuate that perhaps either a family friend or Mary got them involved. It marked the beginning of our family's involvement with a man named Bill Gothard, the man who had delivered the seminar that made such an impact on Pops. Gothard was the founder and leader of IBLP, the Institute for Basic Life Principles, and eventually, when the film crews and excited whispers and stares from fans became a staple of our life, the relationship between Pops and Gothard and his organization would become increasingly significant and increasingly complicated. But back in the day, before we were on TV, things were simpler for us Duggars. We put into practice the lessons that Mom and Dad were teaching us, and we found our own ways of emulating our parents. For a while, all of us older kids and our friends formed different clubs, like the What Would Jesus Do Club, where a bunch of my sisters and a few friends would gather to make WWJD bracelets and talk about handing them out to people. There was another group formed in which us girls all read and discussed a book called Beautiful Girlhood. My sister Jana also formed a club that met in the shed and ate ice cream. I went to all of them regularly, especially Jana's. These clubs were good, but the one I really wanted to join wouldn't let me in, and that bothered me. One evening during Bible time, Pops told us that the local gas station had started selling pornography. Could that be true? Did gas stations sell pornography? I have never, I know I'm young. I know I'm 24 years old and come from the age of more like internet pornography, I guess, and that's how I think of it. But were people really just in the gas station in Arkansas selling porn? That is insane to me. We were all shocked and upset. And my brothers, Josh and John, were determined to do something about it. They invited Stephen and Jeremiah, two of their homeschool friends, and formed the Boys Christian Outreach Team, known as the Boycott Club for short. So Stephen, I believe she's referring to Stephen Holt, and I don't know who Jeremiah is, but she is talking about one of the Holt boys there. Their mission was clear. They planned to buy a load of Christian tracts, small leaflets explaining how to become a Christian, hand them out in town, and try to persuade everyone they knew to boycott the gas station. And if that wasn't enough, there was even a rumor that every time they met, they were going to eat pickles, and that Josh was going to cover them with his own homemade seasoning salt, a legendary recipe that Josh made himself with Lawry's seasoned salt, onion powder, lemon pepper, salt, pepper, and a few other secret ingredients. The Boycott Club was where it was at, and I was desperate to join, but no matter how much I begged or politely asked, my application was refused on account of me being a girl. It was only when I offered $2 to join that the boys agreed that the rules could be bent for me. That is so funny. Josh always cares about the green. That's hilarious. I was a little nervous before I attended my first meeting in the boys' bedroom. I was careful to sit perfectly still and silent as the four members sat in a circle, looking at the items Josh had placed on the floor in the middle: a locked money box, a small pile of tracts, a jar of dill pickles, and a container with his pickle salt inside. Okay, Josh said, calling the meeting to order. So first order of business is money. John, how much do we have? $19.59. A warm murmur of approval went across the room. And Stephen, can you update us on the tracts? Stephen bent over a pile of Christian literature in front of him and pulled out a couple. Some new ones came in the mail. I particularly like this one about not being left behind on the day of judgment. Another warm murmur of approval. Good, Josh said. My dad says that the gas station is still selling pornography, so we can keep encouraging people not to shop there. And with that, it was pickle time. That is like one of the funniest things that she revealed about like life before the TV show in that little tiny house on Johnson Road. Just the idea of them having little clubs and trying to get pornography banned at the gas station is just hilarious to me. And of course it would be Josh running that club. He had like this political like activism mindset. I never had to look far to be reminded of the ways that our family was different to others. Y'all, my cat is acting bad. She does not want to film this video. I never had to look far to be reminded of the ways that our family was different to others. It took an 11-hour drive in our beat-up RV that usually ended up lasting 2 days with the added stops and breakdowns for me to discover how similar we were to others. It was the mid to late 1990s. I was little at the time, too young to even have been given joy as my buddy, but my memories are clear. We set out early in the morning and drove from our home in northwest Arkansas, taking Interstate 40 past Little Rock and all the way to Tennessee to Knoxville. It was a long drive, but the moment we arrived at our destination, we all knew it was worth it. We were attending a conference in a basketball arena at the University of Tennessee, and the venue itself was enough to make any eyes pop. Bleachers rose high and wide. There were bright lights shining onto the stage, and a men's quartet was practicing while people rushed around stage, putting the blue curtains and green ferns in place. We found and occupied a row way up high towards the back. Mom had given each of us a bag with a coloring book, a new box of crayons, and some snacks. Exciting as the bag was, I was busy staring all around me. Wherever I looked, there were people who were just like us. Families with identically dressed children, the girls in matching floral blouses and skirts that reached down to the ground, the boys in navy or khaki pants and button-down shirts, parents marshaling their family units around the arena, some with 4 or 5 kids, others with closer to 20. Having spent the first years of my life being taught how different we were from other people, it was almost shocking to see how many people were dressed like Duggars. The conference was called Advanced Training Institute, ATI, Family Conference, and had been organized by IBLP, the same group that was behind the seminar that made such an important impact on Pops. He and Mom had started to follow the teaching together soon after they got married, but this was our first trip as a family to the annual conference designed to encourage and equip homeschooling family like ours. It sounds like there was quite an attendance, which is very different than it is today. I don't know if y'all saw that picture probably about a year ago of the crowd at one of the seminars, and you could see like Jim, Bob, and Michelle and Gil and Kelly in the audience, but there really wasn't that many people in attendance. But I bet it was crazy for her to see so many people that looked just like her, because I don't know with their home church if the people had the same like dress standards or not. So that probably was an isolating experience to feel so different than the whole world, and then to see there's this like subculture all around the United States that looks and acts just like you. As the event got underway, I was spellbound by the music. The quartet sang in perfect harmony, and the whole auditorium was then led in a series of upbeat hymns. We're marching to Zion, leaning on the everlasting arms, and victory in Jesus, all accompanied by a single talented pianist. The singing was powerful, but it was nothing compared to the moment when IBLP's founder and leader, Mr. Bill Gothard, took the stage. He was short and soft-spoken, but there wasn't a single person in the audience who wasn't listening to what he said. Just like the close and large family, what I heard was instantly familiar to me. Children are a blessing from the Lord. Music can be a tool for the devil. Dancing is immoral and leads to sinful thoughts and behaviors. If somebody was offering you $1 million, would you refuse it? That's what you're doing if you're standing in the way of God's plan for you to have more children. Reject children, and you are rejecting the very blessing of God. Modesty is vital. Do not let yourself or your children lead someone into temptation. Even though he spoke passionately about the value of children and the importance of large families, he was single. I was watching a live stream recently, and it was the McMurtrys. They used to be in with the Andersons of the NIFB. They've now fallen out and have been like, fuck Steven Anderson and all his people. But anyway, they were doing a live stream about the Duggars, and the woman, I don't know how accurate this is, but she says that she heard that Bill Gothard had gotten married after he was kind of exiled from the IBLP, and I was wondering if any of y'all had heard anything about that one. Let me know in the comments. He had never married and had no children, yet I never heard anyone at the conference take issue with it. Mr. Gothard wasn't like the rest of us. The usual rules didn't seem to apply to him. He loved to quote scripture. The King James Version was the only translation used, so the language was old and dusty. But there was a power and authority in it, and I listened carefully, grateful for the clear rules that the Bible provided. Lo, children are a heritage of the Lord, and the fruit of the womb is his reward. Psalms 127:3. The woman shall not wear which pertaineth to a man, neither shall a man put on a woman's garment. For all that you do, so are an abomination unto the Lord thy God. Deuteronomy 22:5. In like matter also, that women adorn themselves in modest apparel, with shamefacedness and sobriety, not with braided hair, or gold, or pearls, or costly array. 1 Timothy 2:9. I was young, so I guess I only understood a fraction of everything I heard. And whenever Mr. Gothard started talking about the 7 basic principles of design, authority, responsibility, suffering, ownership, freedom, and success, I zoned out. But many of the words echoed around the arena had been said many times by my parents at home. And looking around at the faces that were locked on the stage, I guess whatever Mr. Gothard was saying had to be worth following. Eventually, Mr. Gothard stepped away from the lectern and invited people up to join him. I watched as a handful of parents with young babies walked nervously onto the stage. "These are our reversal babies," said Mr. Gothard, at which point the whole arena exploded with applause. My siblings and I were confused, and Mom tried her best to explain over the noise of the clapping what a vasectomy was, and how some women had their tubes tied, and the surgical procedures required to reverse it. A lot of detail went over my head, but the whole place was so full of joy that I didn't doubt for 1 minute that a reversal baby was a very good thing. I didn't need any explanation when the next group of people were invited up. It was a family, a perfectly dressed dad leading a perfectly dressed mom with 8 perfectly dressed children following on behind. They all smiled as they moved with grace and elegance across the stage, arranging themselves in a perfect semicircle in front of the microphone. Mr. Gothard interviewed the dad briefly about how his business was prospering and how his family was such a blessing, then stepped back as the family prepared to launch into song. The arena was silent. Every one of the 8 kids was smiling serenely as they sang. The harmonies were nothing less than perfect. This, I would later discover, was an IBLP tradition, and they were a model family. Ahead of each conference, families could audition for the privilege of being invited on stage and perform a musical number in front of everyone. Some sang a cappella like this family, others brought their instruments and played along. The music was always impressive, but it was only a part of what made a model family special. They had to be modestly dressed, have a lot of kids, homeschool all of them, and play the right kind of music to the right kind of standard. But there was more to it than that. Model families had to demonstrate the values that Mr. Gothard was preaching. Over the years, I would learn from watching model families paraded on stage, as well as reading about them when they were profiled in IBLP newsletters, what it looked like when a family had devoted themselves to living a successful, God-blessed life. Watching that family as they sang and then listening to the applause once they had finished, it was clear that we Duggars were in some way short of the perfection required to become a model family. When we played our instruments at home, the sound was sometimes painful to hear. We didn't keep a strict early to bed, early to rise schedule, which we were told was essential to success. Yeah, the Duggars are known for going to sleep pretty late. We could just about get everybody dressed the same, but it wouldn't ever take long before someone spilled smudge or dribbled mess on their clothes. We weren't model family material, not yet at least. The IBLP conference in Knoxville marked the beginning of a new era in my life. Before it, my world had been so small. We were like settlers in a new, hostile land. My life was almost entirely set at home. It was where we were schooled, where we played, and where we were taught how to live. Home was small, but it was a place of safety. It was our rock, and I knew every inch of it. The lands beyond it were vast and unknowable, beset with hidden dangers that lurked like quicksand. But that trip east changed the way I saw things. We were not alone in this world. There were others just like us, people who looked like us, sang like us, and dressed like us. For the few days we were there, I had been able to let my guard down a little, and I was grateful for that. Mr. Gothard and IBLP had brought us together. He had brought us home. I was delighted that our first trip to Knoxville was not our last. The annual conference became a regular fixture in our family calendar. I'm wondering how they afforded this, because at the time, Jill was saying that she would sometimes eat out of the trash. But taking all of your kids to that conference, first of all, the travel, and second of all, the ticket cost was not easy. And we were also attending other smaller IBLP events throughout the year. Through these trips, I learned about what it meant to live according to Mr. Gothard's principles. At first, my parents didn't send us out to any kids group, mainly because the group cost money, but also because they preferred to keep us with them so we could get the full benefit of the teaching. I would sit and take copious notes on the importance of avoiding alcohol or submitting to the authority of my parents at all ages, even after marriage. Each seminar would end with a call for people to raise their hands as a sign they were pledging to follow whatever IBLP principle had just been explained. I felt pressure to prove my dedication to God, so it never took long before my hand was up in the air. One of those pledges includes the single service pledge, and it was a pledge to say, hey, basically, I'm not going to court or get married until this age, and I'm going to use this as time to serve either in IBLP ministries or ministry in general. Priscilla Waller, so Anna Duggar's sister, took one. I'm pretty sure Anna Duggar also took one because when she got engaged at 20, she said that she had promised her dad that she wouldn't get engaged or married until she was 20. But I'm pretty sure it was also a single service commitment. I think David Waller might have been in one as well. I believe Ginger has talked about that pledge before, and I think she said that none of her siblings took that one. The more of the meetings I attended and the older I got, the more my worldview was shaped. I studied the people around me, especially the young women who were a few years older. Their dress was always modest, but some of them dressed professionally and wore perfectly tailored suit jackets with dress skirts, while others preferred more simple clothing. No patterns or bright prints, just muted, plain colors, no makeup, and maybe even a head covering. Most women I saw were smiling constantly, whether they were performing in the choir or orchestra or just walking around. To my eyes, they didn't just look happy, they looked nearly perfect. Theirs was a wholesome, complete life. I wasn't the only one paying attention or comparing myself to what I saw. One evening, not long after my first homeschool conference experience, one of the model families visited our area and a local church hosted a small event for homeschool families to hear them speak. The family played music and sang. Then the parents spoke about their daily routine and gave tips on how they raised their children. At one point, the mother explained a new concept she had started teaching her younger kids. "We have always taught our children to address us with 'yes ma'am' or 'yes sir,'" she said. "But we decided to take it a step further and teach them to say, 'Yes ma'am, I'd be happy to.' As Christian parents, it's our goal to raise godly, respectful, and obedient children. Our kids must learn to respect and obey their parents first, then eventually they will learn to respect and obey God." I looked at my parents. They were both listening intently. In the days that followed the event, my parents had us trying out the new concept at Bible time, role-playing, "Yes ma'am, yes sir, I'd be happy to." In a short time, we had fully adopted the habit as our own. I believe I've heard Michelle talk about this in particular. I think that they get like a lot of their parenting style and like little tips and little things they do from these other families speaking, not just the model families, I guess, just wherever they hear it, which is a good thing, you know, hearing from other perspectives and going outside just your own knowledge to learn something. But I feel like they don't really think it through that much. They just kind of hear something they like sometimes and start using it. IBLP wasn't the only expansion in our world at that time. My dad started getting involved in politics, successfully running for state legislature in 1998. Whenever it was in session, our whole family would move for 4 months to a rented house a little way outside of Little Rock, Arkansas. Homeschooling would continue just as it always did, though sometimes instead of crowding around the kitchen table or learning outside in the far northwest of the state, some of us older, more mature kids would be allowed to take all of our study materials to the Capitol building while Pops worked. We'd tag along to the small committee meetings or occupy a corner of the balcony area while Pops worked on the floor below. We weren't the only ones doing it, and there were even a couple of homeschool families whose dads were down on the floor while the children studied up on the balcony. We'd picked up on some of the politics, but I mostly enjoyed chatting quietly with my friends, eating candy and other special treats some of Pop's coworkers would give us. My brother Josh, however, was fascinated. He'd get dressed up in a suit and tie and wander downstairs when the session was over. We'd watch him swagger beside Pops, a 12-year-old politician in the making, shaking hands and talking about whatever bill had just been voted on. They called him the little governor. This story, bro, they talk about it all the time, the little governor story. I do think that this was like Josh's special interest and his real, I guess, vision for his life. But one, he wasn't smart enough, I feel like. He was smarter than all the rest. I do believe he likely has a higher IQ and social skills than a lot of his siblings, but compared to the rest of us, I don't think he's that smart. And then for two, obviously he can't get his life together in a non-criminal way to be doing all that. Nike, that word became just as powerful as the click of the tape player in a house full of Duggar toddlers. But while the press of the play button would send us into a blur of vertical motion, Nike would have the opposite effect. Whenever it was called out, everybody immediately looked at their feet. Nobody hesitated, especially not the boys. For as long as I can remember, my parents warned us regularly about the dangers of sin. They told us that sin came in many forms, like lying, stealing, disobeying our parents, or being a tattletale, which my parents called stirring up contention among the brethren. But perhaps the most dangerous and destructive sin of all were around sex and temptation. I feel like Jim Bob especially subscribes to the idea that of the generational sin kind of curse, which I believe is slightly a biblical principle. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it was a big Gothard thing. And I think his dad had a big problem with sex, womanizing. And I think that he was especially, keened in on this. Not that other IBLPers weren't, but I think he was especially vigilant about sex and temptation because he felt like it was a sin that ran in their family. That's just a little speculation of mine. Also, this stirring up contention in the brethren, that was something I had never heard on the show or in any of their other writings or social media, but it comes up a lot in this book. So maybe it's something they kind of got rid of, or at least that specific phrase, as they got the TV show and the kids got older. At first, when we were younger, the lessons were simple and clear-cut. Physical intimacy was created by God and reserved for marriage, they said frequently. So the only person you should ever kiss is the one you marry on your wedding day. I like this simple rule. It made sense to me. But later, as we got older and the first of the Duggar kids approached puberty, the lessons became more complex. It started one summer when I was around 9. Josh was 12 and the twins, John, David, and Jana, were 10. It must have been around the same time of either the Spice Girls or Britney Spears, neither of whom we had ever heard of. And whenever we went into town, it seemed like every other girl we saw was wearing the kind of clothes that showed all their curves and most of their bellies. At first, we tried to ignore it, but with so many people following the fashion, it was almost impossible. Eventually, one day, when we were pulling out of a gas station, one of my older siblings cracked. "Don't look," they said as we passed by a particularly scantily clad teenage girl. "There's a bad girl dressed in modestly over there." Mom turned around instantly and looked at all of us in turn. She wasn't smiling. "Children, be careful about how you speak of others and the words you use. You know, I do want you guys to protect your eyes, but I also want you to be careful not to think down about other people who dress in a certain way. When you see someone dress immodestly, it's okay to tell your siblings not to look, but don't put the other person down. The girl just doesn't know any better. It's not our place to judge. We should be praying for her instead." That was my stern Michelle voice. She paused briefly. "When I was younger, before I was a Christian, I used to mow my lawn in a bikini. I really didn't know any better." The silence that settled on all of us was heavy as a deep winter snow. To think that Mom was dressing so inappropriately at the time Pops was destroying his music collection in pursuit of righteousness was kind of hard to comprehend. But Mom was the most godly woman I knew. Thinking about her transformation only made me love and respect her more. Bro, you know those kids were absolutely gagged by that story too. They were like, oh, like the biggest plot twist ever. Later that evening at home during Bible time, Mom carried on the conversation. "You know what made me want to stop dressing like I used to? It was when I learned from your dad that men aren't like us girls. When women wear tight and revealing clothes that show certain parts of their skin between their collarbone and knees, it gets guys going and can stir up sensual desires. It can make them think bad thoughts. When girls do that to men, they're defrauding them. That's not good, and it can lead them to sin." That's actually so crazy because she says here before, one summer when I was 9, Josh was 12 and the twins were 10. Like, why are you telling them all that? They try to protect them for their age group very heavily, but then they'll say stuff that's like so beyond their knowledge and comprehension that it's just crazy. I think it was the first time I'd ever heard the word defraud, and it hung in my mind for a while. I didn't want to cause young men to think impure thoughts, and I purposed to never defraud. Not by the way I dressed, not by the way I acted. I would be pure and live Christ-like, even if it was difficult at times. Perhaps one day I would be worthy of a truly godly man. Pops raised the issue with us as well, explaining that even though we all have bad thoughts at times, what matters was how we dealt with them. You have the choice about how you'll deal with those thoughts. A thought becomes a sin when you dwell on it. It was around that time that Nike became part of the Duggar code. My parents were looking for a way to keep the boys from having impure thoughts, but wanted something more effective than simply telling them not to look whenever temptation walked by. Nike was their solution. Whenever we were out and saw a female dressed badly, someone defrauding men by potentially planting bad thoughts in their minds, someone would call Nike, and everybody would immediately lock their eyes on their shoes until the clear was given. But Nike wasn't enough. The dangers were not just out there on the street or in the mall. They were not just limited to the summer. They were closer to home, as I soon discovered. I didn't know it at the time, but one problem was church. For as long as I could remember, we attended Temple Baptist Church. Not her name dropping. The teaching wasn't quite the same as Mr. Gothard's, and I don't think there were any other IBLP families there, but it took a conservative line on most things, and people were kind to us even though we didn't share the same beliefs. My parents had always seemed happy enough with us going there, even if some of the other non-IBLP families had standards that were lower than ours, sending their kids to public or Christian schools and allowing them to hang out with the youth group and goof off when the service was over. What's wrong with hanging out with the youth group? That's actually insane. But it was at the end of the year when things went wrong. We attended a Christmas program at a different church and sat in silent horror as female members of the youth group, which no Duggar kid had ever been allowed to attend, perform a dance. Later that night, Pops was somber as we settled down in our beds for Bible time. "I am so sorry," he began, addressing us all, but looking particularly at the boys. "You should not have seen that. I was wrong to take us there tonight. We won't be going back to that church event again." Bible time revolved around the theme of how hard it can be to do right, even in Christian circles. Not every Christian held themselves to the same standard. Sometimes, Pop said, you have to be bold and learn to stand alone. This must have gotten Mom and Pops thinking about Temple Baptist, because a short while after they announced that we had left and we were going to be a part of a new church that a pastor and homeschool father was starting. I wonder if that was Jim Holt's home church. Pops let the church meet in a trailer house that he owned, and right from the start it reminded me of the ATI and IBLP conferences. I don't remember what I felt about us leaving Temple Baptist. Some of that time in my life was blurred. So basically this is the time where Josh is about 12. So I think that's where all of the kind of shady stuff, if you know what I mean, happened. So I could see how that time in her life was blurred. The memory pulled out of focus, but I do remember the afternoon when Pops and Mom called me into their bedroom and closed the door. I was 11 at the time and they both looked pale and tired in ways I'd never seen them look before. I wonder if Mom had been crying. "Hey," Pop said quietly. For once, the words weren't coming fast and freely. He had to search for them, to hunt them down. "Josh has been talking to us. He confessed about some stuff that he had done. Can we talk to you about it?" So yeah, as I said, during that time, a lot of her memories and stuff were blurred because of kind of what was happening. I would have loved for her to enumerate. I get that it's private and she probably wants to keep that, just to herself in a private moment, but I do wonder how exactly that information was shared with her and what words were used. I nodded, sat quiet, and waited for Pops to find the next words that he was going to say. All right, y'all, that is the end of chapter 1 of Counting the Cost. I will see y'all in the next one.